There is a quietness in the presence of God that words often fail to capture. It is not thunder that brings transformation, nor the earthquake that reveals his nearness, but the stillness. In that sacred silence, when the noise of the world fades and the heart is stripped bare of its striving, the Spirit begins to speak. Not in shouts, not in demands, but in whispers too holy for the ears alone. The language of the Spirit is not learned in books or taught by men. It is discovered in surrender when the soul leans in, desperate not to miss a single breath of heaven. The voice of God rarely interrupts. It waits, gentle and patient, like dew that forms in the stillness of dawn. It speaks in impressions, in stirrings, in moments so subtle we might overlook them unless our hearts are attuned. When the Spirit speaks, it does not argue or insist. It invites. A soft prompting to turn, to trust, to take one more step into the unknown. And those who learn this language come to know that the most powerful words ever spoken were not shouted from a mountaintop, but whispered into a willing heart. To understand the language of the Spirit is to understand that God desires communion, not performance. He speaks to those who make room not just in their schedule, but in their spirit. He speaks in the pause between our prayers, in the space between our fears. Sometimes it's a sudden peace that washes over the chaos. Sometimes it's a tear that falls without explanation. Often it's simply a knowing, a divine awareness that He is here and He is speaking. Many miss His voice because they search for something loud, something obvious. But He is the God who hides in plain sight, the voice behind you saying, "This is the way." He speaks in dreams, in scripture, in nature, and in the unexpected moments when you feel seen. The language of the Spirit is more than words, it is presence, it is communion, it is life. It is the echo of eternity breathed into time. Those who hear Him are not always the ones with perfect theology or polished lives, but those who are willing to listen. The Spirit speaks to the humble, the broken, the still. To those who dare to believe that God would draw near not to condemn, but to commune, not to impress, but to embrace. And in that place of quiet intimacy, when God speaks softly, the soul is forever changed. There are moments when the Spirit's voice comes not as new instruction, but as a remembrance. He brings to mind a forgotten promise, a word once read in passing that now burns with clarity. He reminds us of who we are, not as the world defines, but as heaven sees. His language does not flatter, yet it never wounds. It corrects, but always with grace. And even when He is silent, His silence carries weight. In the stillness, He is not absent, He is waiting. Waiting for the heart to turn, for the spirit to quiet, for the soul to trust. When God speaks softly, He reveals more than information. He reveals Himself. It is not simply about hearing His voice, but knowing His nature. He is kind, He is near, He is faithful. And once you've heard that voice, not with ears, but with your spirit, nothing else satisfies. The words of men become noise. The applause of the world loses its grip. All that matters is staying near the one whose whisper holds more power than the loudest shout on earth. To live in tune with the Spirit is to live gently. It is to speak with intention, to walk with reverence, to love without fear. The language of the Spirit teaches us not only how to hear, but how to live, slowly, deeply, freely. We become less concerned with outcomes and more drawn to obedience. We realize that the greatest victories are often unseen, and the loudest miracles often begin with a whisper in the dark. And when the Spirit speaks, whether through a quiet morning, a verse that won't let go, or a sudden unexplainable peace, it changes everything. It softens what was hardened. It awakens what was numb. It calls forth courage from places we thought were empty. It is in that moment, when God speaks softly, that eternity brushes against time and the soul finally remembers what it was made for. This is the invitation to discover the language of the Spirit and to live by His breath, to be guided not by signs or circumstances, but by a voice you've come to know in the quiet. And once you have known it, you will crave it above all else, because nothing compares to the sweetness of His whisper. Nothing heals like His presence. Nothing leads like His love. There is a hidden strength in softness. The world teaches us to push harder, speak louder, prove more. But the Spirit teaches the opposite. He leads us into gentleness, not as weakness, but as a mark of deep inner authority. Those who have heard the whisper of God do not need to shout to be heard. They have been anchored by something deeper than opinion, steadied by a word not of this world. When God speaks softly, He teaches us to live from the inside out, no longer driven by fear or pride, but moved only by the pulse of His heart. Often the whisper comes at inconvenient times when we're distracted, busy, or sure of our own direction. And yet, even then He speaks, patiently, lovingly, calling us back to the path we didn't even know we left. He doesn't condemn. He corrects with tenderness. His voice doesn't bruise even when it breaks us, because in every word there is love. Not the fleeting kind that flatters or fades, but a holy love that seeks what is best, even when it hurts. The kind of love that speaks softly because it knows it doesn't have to shout to be true. There is mystery in how the Spirit speaks. Not everything can be explained. There are moments when you feel led to pray without knowing why, or you suddenly carry a burden for someone you've never met. You sense a door closing, but peace follows. Or you step out with trembling faith, and clarity comes after obedience, not before. This is the language of the Spirit. It's not always linear, not always comfortable, but it is always holy. It stretches us into trust, into deeper dependence, and into a kind of faith that walks by listening, not by seeing. And this is what makes the journey sacred, not that we know everything, but that we are known. Not that we always hear perfectly, but that He keeps speaking anyway. The Spirit is not deterred by our weakness. In fact, He often chooses it, because it is in weakness that we are most aware of His strength. In silence, we learn to crave His voice. In stillness, we realize that what we truly need is not more answers, but more of Him. So we learn to wait. We learn to listen. Not with impatience, but with expectation. Because when God speaks softly, He does not merely inform, He transforms. He does not just tell us where to go, He shows us who we are. He awakens the eternal in us. And once we've heard Him there, in the quiet, we are never the same again. And so we begin to live differently, not chasing noise, but cultivating quiet. We make space not just in our schedules, but in our souls. We learn that hearing from God is not a rare event, but a daily invitation. An open door into the unseen, where the Spirit speaks not only about destiny, but about intimacy. He reminds us that we were never meant to walk alone. That even in our darkest valleys, the Shepherd is near, and His voice, though soft, still leads us beside still waters and restores our soul. The world may not understand this kind of listening. It may call it foolish to trust a whisper over facts, to follow peace over plans. But those who walk with the Spirit know better. They know that one whisper from heaven can do what 1,000 sermons cannot. One gentle prompting can reroute a life. One quiet yes in response to His voice can unlock a door no man can shut. This is the miracle of it all. God still speaks, not from a distant throne, but from within through the Spirit that lives in those who are willing to receive. His language isn't reserved for the elite, the perfect, or the loud. It's for the willing, the surrendered, the listening. Those who, in the middle of chaos, stop and say, "Speak, Lord. I'm listening." And when he speaks, even softly, it is enough. Enough to calm storms, enough to mend hearts, enough to call dead things back to life. For his voice carries more than words, it carries power, presence, and purpose. And those who learn to recognize that voice come alive in ways they never thought possible. So be still. Let the noise fall away. Wait in the quiet. Because when God speaks softly, he does not just change the moment, he changes you. There is something sacred about becoming fluent in the unseen. It's not about achieving more or knowing all the answers. It's about learning to trust the gentle nudge, the quiet conviction, the sudden warmth that floods your spirit when truth brushes against your heart. This is not the language of the mind, but of the soul, where words are fewer but meaning is deeper. Where a single moment of divine encounter speaks louder than hours of human reasoning. This is where the Spirit leads us, not to a stage, but to a secret place. Not to prove ourselves, but to be known by him. In the quiet, he peels back the layers. He reveals motives. He heals wounds we didn't know we had. And he whispers truths we had forgotten, like, "You are loved, you are seen, you are mine." These are not just comforting phrases. When they come from him, they become anchors. They hold us steady when everything else shakes. In this place, prayer becomes more than requests. It becomes communion. We stop trying to convince God of what we need and start receiving what he already knows we do. We begin to speak back to him in the language he taught us, through silence, through tears, through joy that has no explanation. Sometimes through words and sometimes with none at all. Because when your spirit knows his, it doesn't always need translation. His presence is the message. And still, the beauty is he never stops speaking. Day by day, moment by moment, he draws near. Whether we're ready or not, whether we feel worthy or not, the Spirit is always near, always speaking, always inviting. And every time we respond, something within us softens, aligns, awakens. We begin to walk not by force, but by flow, not by striving, but by surrender. This is the quiet revolution of the Spirit. He doesn't come to overwhelm. He comes to transform. Not through the spectacular, but through the sacred ordinary. The gentle voice in the morning stillness. The holy hush in the middle of a storm. The sudden awareness that you're not alone. These are the footprints of God. This is the language of the Spirit. So let your heart be quiet now. Let it be still enough to hear again the voice that calls you by name, that knows your frame, that speaks not to impress but to impart. His whisper is not distant, it is here, closer than your breath, more faithful than your shadow. Do not rush away from this moment. Wait. Listen, for in this silence you are standing on holy ground. You were not created for constant noise. You were created to walk with him in the cool of the day, to be led by his Spirit, to recognize the sound of his voice even in the smallest things. The quiet nudge to forgive, the unexpected pull toward compassion, the sudden peace that silences fear. These are not accidents. These are sacred echoes. God is speaking. And when he speaks softly, mountains move. When he whispers, darkness breaks. When He calls, everything changes. So may your soul learn to love the silence not as emptiness, but as invitation. May your ears become tuned to the gentle frequency of heaven. May your life become a response to His voice, a living testimony that God still speaks, and He still chooses to speak softly. Now go, not as one who simply heard, but as one who carries the whisper. Walk slowly, love deeply, listen daily. And remember, sometimes the most powerful move of God in your life will begin with a voice so soft you can only hear it if you're still. There will come seasons where the silence lingers longer than you expected, where prayers feel unanswered and heaven seems still. But even then, do not mistake silence for absence. God's quiet is not rejection, it is preparation. In the hidden place, He is shaping your ears to hear what noise is always drowned out. He is tuning your heart to recognize Him, not just when He moves mountains, but when He simply stands with you in the valley. The language of the Spirit is learned not only in light, but often in shadow. We learn that hearing Him is not a reward for holiness, it is the fruit of hunger. He speaks to those who seek, not perfectly, but persistently. To those who return again and again to the secret place, not because of obligation, but because their spirit has found its home. In His whisper, there is rest. In His stillness, there is strength. And slowly, without even realizing it, you are changed. Not with dramatic flashes of glory, but with the quiet renewal of a heart that now beats in rhythm with His. Over time, the whisper becomes your guide. It speaks when you rise, when you walk, when you lie down. It leads you in ways that logic cannot explain, but peace confirms. You begin to trust it not blindly, but deeply, because you've come to know the one behind the voice. And even when the path is uncertain, His tone is familiar. His kindness becomes your compass. His presence becomes your portion. And isn't that the miracle? That the God who created galaxies chooses to speak so gently? That the Almighty, the Eternal, stoops to whisper into the fragile spaces of your soul? Not because He must, but because He loves. Because He desires to be known. Because His delight is not in showing power, but in sharing fellowship. So let your life be a quiet place He can speak into. Let your spirit become fluent in His language. Let your faith rest not on signs, but on the sound of His whisper. For when God speaks softly, He speaks in a way that marks you forever, not with volume, but with presence. And in the end, that is what you'll remember most, not the noise that came and went, but the still, small voice that stayed. There is a deeper place, still a sacred depth, where the soul no longer listens just to hear a word, but to abide with the Word Himself. Here you are not driven by outcomes. You are no longer chasing answers, signs, or moments of affirmation. Instead, your heart finds its reward in His nearness alone. You begin to understand that intimacy with the Spirit is not a means to something else, it is the end. It is everything. In that sacred union, obedience becomes joy, not duty. You no longer question every step or fear every silence. You walk with Him, sometimes without needing to speak at all, because you've learned the language of trust. The Spirit begins to shape your instincts, sanctify your desires, refine your motives. You respond to promptings you can't explain. You extend compassion that doesn't make sense. You wait when everything in you wants to run. Why? Because the whisper is guiding you. Because you have learned the sound of God's breath in your soul. And in this life of quiet guidance, you will see miracles, not always the kind that make headlines, but the kind that mark eternity. With the courage to forgive, the strength to let go, the wisdom to remain silent when accusation rises, the peace to rest while others strive. These are the fruits of a life formed by the Spirit's voice. These are the quiet wonders that unfold when you no longer need God to shout to believe He's near. Over time, you begin to realize the soft voice was never small. It was holy. It was gentle because it carried glory too weighty to be forced. The whisper was powerful not in volume but in origin. It came from the throne, straight to the innermost part of you. And now that you've heard it, you can never go back to a life of noise without noticing the absence of His breath. This is the narrow way, the path of the listener. It may not be crowded, but it is rich. It may not come with applause, but it comes with presence. And in the end, it is His voice that will remain when all others fade. Not the loud, not the spectacular, but the still, small voice calling, "Come, follow me." Like, comment, and subscribe.